about unleashing digital talent for fun and profit with me, Dave Aaron of Leading Edge Forum, and Rich Davis.
Good afternoon, good morning.
Thanks for spending the time. I hope you'll find this very interesting, but also Rich is my boss, so even if you don't, please clap loudly at the end. Rich and I have spent the last 6-7 months researching this topic of talent, digital talent, etc. And we've come out with this research report, 19th of July, available on our website, about some breakthrough practices, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Rich, I know that, obviously talent's always been an issue, but I know it's a particular passion of yours about challenges our clients are having, etc. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's becoming such a big issue now because, we talk a lot in the LEF about 21st century organizations. And what we really mean by that is that you're going to have to change the construct of how the company is actually put together and take advantage of a whole new different set of skills to really provide the basis upon which to deliver new products and services centered around the customer, not just centered around I have this and I want to sell you this, but I'm going to sell you something that you specifically want and it's tailored to you. And a big part of that, Dave, is the new technologies are driving this. The use of AI, artificial intelligence, machine intelligence, and those sort of technologies are clashing with the existing company structures. And in order to deliver the next generation of services, we believe it's going to require a different way of constructing organizations. And so the big question that this is raising is, do those organizations, and most of us work for these companies, they're big, they're established, lots of legacy, do the people in there have the skills necessarily to build these new platforms and these new services? And the answer, looking in our report, is no.
Yeah. I mean, could you say a little bit more about that? Because, obviously it's easy to say, it's almost a cheap shot to say anything is an issue. But in terms of how do we know that talent's an issue? I mean, I think we got some great stats about that, right?
We did. We took stats from people both at board level and then at functional level. So I think it was the HBR survey recently or earlier this year of nearly 3,000 board members of major corporations, and retaining talent and attracting talent was a top 3 issue across all of them. Yeah. Quite damning in terms of the importance of this issue. And similarly, when we did a survey of CIOs through the LEF, they themselves said, it came out highest again, attracting and retaining talent, and 41% of those surveyed said that they did not really have a strategy to bring in, those next generation skills and talent that they believe are required to drive their companies forward. So we had a lot of evidence, Dave, around why this is becoming such a big issue.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say from our research, you and me have seen that a lot of people are innovating around technology trends like blockchain, etc. But there's not that much innovation going on around talent, right?
No.
And if I can be honest, personally, I used to think the talent issue was really boring. I used to think, it's all about technology and processes and partners, etc., and strategy. And the people stuff was just a boring admin thing. Then I did an MBA, and I got all excited about the vision of human capital management and all that. And then I came back with a crunch to the real world, like HR departments in companies, which either often aren't capable or aren't funded or aren't pushed to the big human capital vision. And it's more kind of an administrivia function.
Yeah.
I think I was sharing with you before this recording.
You were.
One of my previous companies, I called up my HR representative when I joined and said, can we have a coffee and a chat about development? And she said, I'm sorry, I'm far too busy to talk to you. And that, to me, that's the reality of HR I've experienced in a lot of companies. So I think, there's both a huge opportunity and challenge, but maybe HR organizations haven't been funded and pointed at the big vision. I don't know if that's your experience too, Rich.
We certainly have not seen them playing a major role in this particular area, I think it's fair to say. And That, I think, is a little worrying if we are at the same time saying that we need to build new types of companies to compete with the Digerati, to compete with the Amazons and the Googles of the world, that will require a fundamental restructuring of particular organizations, but also where do you slot that massive talent that you need into and let it flourish.
Yeah.
And if they're not involved in that conversation, and theirs is still really a capability modeling exercise in many cases, I think, as you were alluding to, then yes, I think that's an issue.
Yeah.
And certainly that came out loud and clear in the report.
Cool. And I think, you know, from our team's research, Bill Murray and Glenn Robinson of our team, they're looking at how the IT organization is evolving to need new skills. And I like the term, the artist formerly known as IT, in terms of how things are changing. Maybe a hollowing out of some technical skills to the cloud, maybe the IT, OT, Internet of Things dimension coming in, the whole AI, big data, analytics you talked about, and also the whole digital customer experience coming in. All new talent challenges, right?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And what is really interesting, and we've seen this evolution over the last few years, is that there are very few industries now where technology has not disrupted their particular core markets. I think it's, you know, I think we're all, are we bored with it? That's the wrong word. But, you know, we can always cite Uber. You can always cite some of the Digerati. It's almost easier to cite those because they're new startups and they're from scratch and they don't have assets and so on. But when you hear the CEOs of some of the major banks saying we are not banks, we are technology companies, then that in itself, to me, sends an extremely strong message that this issue of talent, especially around some of the new technologies that are being driven by the matrix, that are being driven by the great availability of functionality now that's out there, a lot of it free. Then that certainly has to be something that should be top of mind for most executives who are responsible for driving this change.
Cool. So yeah, there's almost this flow, right? There's a flow that says every company is becoming highly digitally driven. Digital requires whole new rafts of talent, some of which is very scarce. And hence digital talent wars arguably will decide the winners and losers in the next decade.
Well, certainly. I mean, you were with me. We're out in California on the last study tour, and that was a study tour really looking at machine intelligence and how we think that's going to impact the marketplace and our traditional customers. And there is a massive, massive shortage of these skills. And people will have to pay a premium. But more importantly, people will also have to factor in whether those people actually want to come and work for your company. And if they do want to come and work for your company, what is the environment within which you can let them flourish, rather than, dare I say it, crush them into shadows of their former selves by using 19th, 20th century management principles, which we don't think are going to work in the 21st century.
That's so cool. So it's like, it's not just about the digital talent, it's about allowing it to, conditions for it to flourish in your organization. And also maybe that you don't have to have ownership of the talent necessarily, more access. So I think Rich and I both like this expression, romancing the problem. So we've tried not to romance the problem of talent too much, although I think the first few minutes of this session we just have romanced it. And we've instead focused, we've identified 8 breakthrough techniques, which are answers, things that the minority are doing that seem to be applicable to the majority and seem to move the talent story forward. So if it's cool, I'm just going to share with you at a high level what these 8 are. Then Rich and I are just going to drill into a couple. And if you're interested, the material's available to drill into all of them later. Cool. So essentially, we found 4 breakthrough techniques related to accessing, not necessarily owning talent, but having access to the talent you need, and another 4 about unleashing that talent, almost the opposite of what you call crushing the talent, right? Unleashing, making productive, motivating. So the 4 to do with accessing are talent as a service, aka crowdsourcing talent, BYOT, which I'll say a bit more about in a minute, bring your own team or lift outs, incubators, accelerators, catapults, pick the coolest term, garages possibly, getting associated with innovative places for startups and scale-ups to work, talent through osmosis. Acqui-hires, a really ugly term, technically a portmanteau term, combination of acquisition and hiring, where you buy a small startup in order primarily to get the talent. Those are the 4 to do with access. And then the 4 to do with unleashing, reverse mentoring, the opposite of what we've always thought of as mentoring, junior and less tenured people mentoring senior and more tenured to create innovation. Internal talent marketplaces, almost like the crowdsourcing, but internally. Instead of managers owning talent, allowing talent to bid for what it wants to work on. Self-managed teams, again, to Rich's point about crushing, not crushing the talent, allowing teams to operate in the way they want, managing them just based on outcomes. And finally, people science, which I know Rich is going to mention, the notion of using analytics, big data, in order to drive talent success. So there's a lot of detail in the report available on the website on this, but we were just going to pick a couple. I know you think that the people science stuff's really cool, right, Rich?
I do, and I'll cover that in a bit more detail later, but it's certainly something that I have picked up, but that the early adopters are potentially going to steal quite a march.
Cool. All right. So, I mean, would you be comfortable now sort of sharing your thoughts on what we found about people science?
Yeah. I mean, it's, when we looked at this particular issue of people science, some people will call it data science, some people are calling it lots of different terms, but in effect, there is software out there now, or companies out there, Collaboration AI being one of them, ClearSight being another one, where people are beginning to experiment with these technologies and really to see whereabouts they're trying them. And I think one of the biggest things about all of this is, if you are not experimenting with these technologies now, you should be. Because as I think we alluded to at the start, this isn't a technology issue, this is a leadership and a people issue. And if you're not conversant with these technologies, starting to look at how to use TensorFlow, for instance, or those things from Google or other such technologies, then you're really not going to get ahead of the curve. And so we started to look at the whole people science issue, started to look at examples of people out there, and it was really interesting. I mean, there were 1 or 2 areas that spring to mind where people have seen immediate benefits, and some of those are in the whole area of trying to cut sickness. In terms of early joiners, people have been looking to identify new sources of talent, and I know people like Alexander Mann have been very strongly starting to use some of these AI technologies to identify where that new talent lies. I thought it was really interesting. We talked to we saw an article with the HR director of HCL, and she was basically saying now that 10% of their HR budget is set aside to be spent on AI technologies in terms of how that will help drive the ability of the HR organization to play a role in attracting, retaining and finding this talent. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, to me it's interesting because AI obviously is one of the hot tickets at the moment, but I think when people think of AI, they either think of AI driving kind of the consumer experience like chatbots, etc. Or they think about AI in terms of operational intelligence, like how to tune your business processes, your customer transactions, etc. Not necessarily AI pointed at the people in the organization and how to improve their productivity.
Absolutely, and I think, I'm trying to think of the name, it was Virgin Media's head of people. They used, I think it was ClearSight, to look at identifying early stage sickness and trying to be more predictive and get on the front foot of early joiners. And that one project alone, I think, and they went to press on this, saved them over £1 million within a 3-month period.
Yeah, there was that,
quite staggering.
There's that cool. There's an article in the Times, I think, in January, which mentioned that, and a few other, great examples. Not of the general concept, but actual hard cash savings, or productivity gains from this. Right?
Very much so, and I think the other one is early attrition in new joiners. That was another area that somebody thought, well, let's just see if I start applying. Let me experiment on this attrition, and it was Capgemini actually who identified and did a prototype in this area, and 40% attrition was stopped in early joiners by using some of these technologies to be more predictive and to let them get ahead of the curve. Now, if you translate that back into how much it costs to invest in new joiners from the university system, how much time, effort is spent on that's not just a monetary saving, that's much more than that. And again, in there will be some of the future leaders of that firm. So, those are kind of some of the early stage examples that we're seeing.
Fantastic.
And of course, if you do go to the Digerati, they use this as a matter of course. Facebook are probably one of the biggest users of this, not on their own staff, but also to try and identify the talent that's out there, because these systems give you a much wider reach into the world of this skills shortage. So those utilizing this can get out in front and can be winners over those that probably have a narrower, more traditional way of recruiting these kind of skills.
Cool, thank you. So just to be clear, that is one of the 8 areas that we identified. And again, we called these breakthrough techniques because the minority are using them, but they're getting supernormal benefits. Next one.
I must say, Dave, in many cases, these are free or they're on trial, because again, it's about getting the adoption. Because again, these technologies that live in the matrix, they don't come with high license fees and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
although a very different way.
Although the people who know how to use them maybe aren't free and aren't so easily available.
No, absolutely.
So I think that's why some of these interesting startups, like the ones you mentioned, Collaboration.ai, ClearSight, have a role to play, right, in helping us.
I think they have a very big role to play.
Yeah, cool. So if I may, I'll just quickly touch on one other technique during this session. It's almost diametrically opposed. It's nothing to do with technology, but it's the notion of BYOT, bring your own team. It's been going on for many years in investment banks, and it's often called lift outs. But the idea is, why should I hire a talented individual and go through all the pain of them getting to work with everyone else? Rather than that, maybe I hire a preformed team. Still as permanent staff, so it's still an actual recruiting process. It's not using a team as consultants. So you get all the benefits of them being fully on board and committed to your organization. But they know how to work together. They've been through the forming, norming, storming, performing. In fact, one of the companies we looked at, Stripe, a sort of mid-sized payments company, I think it's had $450 million of funding. It's been around a good few years. It's been used by Twitter and Lyft and others as customers. So it's not a tiny company. But if you look at their recruiting site, it says, we want to hire molecules, not atoms. So they want to hire preformed teams that perform well. Obviously, there's some risk in that, because you might create a sort of us and them culture. But you can get over that through some smart techniques, use of time, metrics based on integrating, but you get all the benefits. And just to mention, there's a guy called Boris Groysberg, a professor, I believe, at Harvard. He has identified if an individual moves versus a team around that talented individual, of course the team performs better at the beginning, but it takes, the amazing thing is it takes 5 years for that individual on their own to be as productive as the individual who moves with their team. So this is a very unusual practice. It's done in some industries like surgical teams, investment banking teams, etc. But we think it's got real promise where there's this talent shortage.
And just on that, I don't know, and we've talked about this in particular, but I'm beginning to see this in the area of cloud, where organizations are having to be quite quick and quite agile about how fast they can start making that shift from these traditional models to the new technologies. And in many cases, the only way to do that is to take a team who have done this, whether it was in a smaller organization, and drop ship them in and have them really be almost a positive irritant or a clash to the common culture of the firm, because it's just culturally going to take too long to try and do this the normal way. And I've witnessed that personally in a couple of banks here in London, certainly even in the last 6 months, where the room was a drop ship team.
Right.
Who probably didn't know many people in the rest of that large organization, but they knew each other intimately and trusted each other.
Yeah. And obviously they're going to get some challenges, some failures, etc. But I think the message is we need to experiment. As we sort of draw this session to a close, this Facebook Live session, I wonder if you had any kind of high-level learnings from our 6-month research, like one or two things that you wanted to pull out and share before we closed.
I think for me there's probably two areas in particular that certainly I would like to share with everybody. One is HR does need to be involved in this and does need to play a fuller role in the wider challenges and the wider implications of not getting this talent and not giving this talent the room to flourish. If you bring the talent in and then you apply old school models and processes that you already have and policies, that's really not going to be a very good thing to do. So I would urge the HR community, if anyone from there is watching this, to really try and understand this new world and the skills and the way that it behaves. And we've seen this in the Digerati, the cell-based structured teams, so that's my first one. And the second one is probably a much wider observation, and it probably plays into a wider leading edge forum mantra. And we have, we've been doing a lot of work on what we call 21st century humans. Software can be upgraded, but can you? And that's a really important point. If you're going to make these changes, then you need to understand these technologies and you need to be able to use them yourself, wherever you sit in the organization. And so what I took from the report on the second area was those companies that are experimenting now are going to be the ones probably that start to build up the know-how and the ability to actually use them in anger.
Cool.
Those that are not using it now, I would strongly urge you to start looking at them. They're out there, read the report, we give some great examples in there.
Cool. So you've really said make sure HR is involved, and experiment.
Correct.
Is all this kind of stuff about failing fast, etc., applies here too. And maybe my point, it's almost a counterpoint to the make sure HR's involved, is don't feel you can delegate the talent responsibility to HR. Most of the really successful digital companies at the moment are showing the way here, I think, in the amount of time and effort that all the management are devoting to continually finding new talent, building their brand, making the place an attractive place to work, etc. It's the core of our jobs going forward. If every company's getting more digital, if there are digital talent gaps, if talent wars will win the day, all leaders in the organization better be devoting a lot of their time to talent. So I hope you found this useful. I've really enjoyed doing it with you, Rich.
Yeah, me too, Dave. Thanks for inviting me along. It's been great.
The report's available on the website. We'll be having a forum in November where this will be one of the big topics along with others. And in general, please feel free to access the recording of this on the website, which will be there in a couple of days, and engaging with Leading Edge Forum on these topics. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dave.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.